Hi, it is Rotten Dog here, and today we're doing city animal tier list by TierZoo. So, let's get into it.
Sponsored by CuriosityStream.
Here I go! Body shield here. Level 4.
One of the newest biome types introduced to the game is the city biome. This is a completely unique biome type that's almost entirely constructed by human players. However, this video isn't about those human players, nor is it about the players they deliberately add to their party, like cats and dogs, but rather all the other builds in the game, and which ones function the best in the city meta. While obviously not all cities are the same, there are certain strategies that tend to make for a viable city build. We'll first discuss the most and least relevant abilities for city meta builds, and then go through the tier list for the city meta. The most important objective when playing in a city biome is avoiding direct contact with humans. While there are ways to defeat humans, doing battle with them on their home turf is nearly impossible. And so builds that easily get in a human's way, attract a lot of attention, or come off as intimidating to humans are going to be at the highest risk of doing that. So what types of builds tend to struggle in cities? The resounding answer seems to be tank builds. While tanks tend to be the most outright powerful builds in a given server, the city biome does not favor slow-moving herbivores that require huge amounts of food and have to spend most of the day grazing. In addition to attracting a ton of attention, the city meta is fast-moving and full of unorthodox barriers that slow, large, defense-based builds have trouble overcoming. Builds that have controlling large territories as part of their main questline will also have a lot of difficulty in city biomes. Cities are tightly packed because the potential loot is so good. If all that you're after is the XP-rich food, great. But if you're after the territory itself, few challenges are more difficult or deadly than trying to conquer a human player's territory. So what does work in cities? Probably the most common trait among successful city builds is omnivory. That's because omnivory is key to making sure the supremely valuable loot available in cities is something your character can actually make use of. This isn't to say that you can't succeed as a pure carnivore. Obviously, the crowded nature of cities means there's a lot of potential PvP targets. But there's no question that the scavenger strategy is more effective in cities than in any other biome. Another common trait is nocturnalism, since this makes it much easier to avoid humans. Normally, I tell players who swap to a nocturnal playstyle to avoid dealing with the diurnal player base to get good. But honestly, when it comes to humans, I think it's a fair strategy. As I said before, city biomes present some of the most challenging terrain to navigate in the entire game, and so having high mobility and a versatile array of movement options is essential to traversing the concrete jungles. Don't spec into a high top speed if it means giving up the ability to climb, high jump, crawl, or swim, because cities will test your ability to do all of these frequently. Perhaps one of the most powerful city abilities is flight, because it not only lets you bypass just about any obstacle, but also is by far the best way to avoid or escape contact with dangerous humans. The most common obstacles you'll be able to interact with in cities are power lines, which can be scaled if you have the climb ability, but tend to be best utilized by aerial builds as high visibility, low risk perch spots. Sewers, which can be accessed with the crawl ability and can function as a safe shortcut to multiple points in a city. Buildings, which often require multiple skills to navigate successfully and often contain the best loot, but are also the most dangerous places to enter due to being almost always guarded by humans. And most importantly, roads, which are the most common death trap for players in the city and require careful strategy to traverse. However, in the city meta, the most important factor by far is the build's intelligence stat. And this is because the best rewards can only be sustainably looted by using careful strategy and problem solving. Whether it's opening doors, crossing streets, avoiding traps, or stealing loot from humans, without intelligence, gameplay in the city biome is much more difficult. Alright, so let's get into the tier list for the city meta. In F tier, we have the Deer Guild, which includes the classic deer build along with its variants like the elk and moose. These builds lack nearly all of the most important traits for a city build. They don't have a high intelligence stat, they can't climb or crawl, and they aren't omnivorous. However, deer players love to loot the gardens that human mains create in cities and suburbs, and because of that are extremely common at the edges of city biomes. However, they struggle to survive further in because of one of the main obstacles, roads. Because they have no way to climb or fly, they often have to cross roads by making an awareness check, which they often end up failing. However, even at the edge of cities, when things get crowded, deer don't do well, developing chronic wasting disease, although this is mostly due to a random bug in the deer's code, which I hope gets patched out soon. Next on the tier list we have the first of many birds. Because of their high average intelligence, birds tend to do quite well in the city meta. This includes even the weakest bird builds out there, like the pigeon, which is on the low end of average in terms of the bird's stats. Still, being below average intelligence for a bird still puts you well above the average overall, and pigeons are great at making use of it, mostly for superior aerial navigation and for recognizing the human mains that tend to host drop parties most frequently. While their street smarts are solid, their combat potential leaves a lot to be desired. Pigeons get bodied by basically every other build in the city meta, and for that, they're stuck in D tier. The next build on the list is another bird, one that's opted for a tank type build, the goose. Now, I've actually got a full video dedicated to geese, so I won't spend too much time discussing them here. But geese are actually one of the few builds in the game that had a nearly dead player base, with numbers dwindling before they started joining city servers. However, with the introduction of city parks, geese have risen to prominence more so than ever before. With that said, as intimidating as they can be, they're easily defeated as long as your build can resist their intimidation abilities. They pose no real threat and don't really compete for the best loot either, and for that reason they're also in D tier. In C tier, we have a build that's had a bit of breakout success in the city meta, the coyote. Coyotes hold a low tier spot in the prairie and forest meta, mainly due to their inability to deal adequate damage to other players. However, most of the coyote's competition struggles in the city meta, while the coyote's excellent intelligence stat allows it to do quite well here. And in the city, potential targets for the coyote sport much less impressive combat stats. Coyotes are one of the few builds with a favorable matchup against the house cat build, one of the main matchups to consider in the city meta. This can work against the coyote sometimes though, as human players don't take kindly to coyotes attacking their vulnerable players in their party. Still, C tier is a higher placing than I gave to coyotes on the canine tier list I made, meaning I think the coyote build is more effective in the city than anywhere else. Next we have the gull, a build very similar in playstyle to the pigeon, but with a bit of added bulk, enabling it to survive attacks that would mean game over for players in the lower weight class. Although they're excellent scavengers, because this build was initially developed by carnivore players, its combat abilities are strong enough to enable it to take down other players if need be. This build does best in coastal cities, but really is solid in just about any city, and ranks at high C tier. In B tier, we have the feral hog, another build which had a bit of breakout success in recent times. Feral hogs are the bulkiest build on this list, and because of their bulk, they've got essentially no unfavorable matchups against the other non-human city builds. They are easily the safest build to play when it comes to having to fear combat from other players, unlike coyotes, which humans only perceive as dangerous, but really are far too weak to pose a threat to them. Feral hogs legitimately are dangerous to humans. Because of this, I would expect the human player base to start calling for bans, and react quite aggressively when a hog's presence is discovered. Still, with one of the highest intelligence stats in the game, the hog build can quickly learn to navigate cities. Perhaps their worst detriment is that they require a lot of loot to sustain, and since they can't climb, they may run out of all available loot rather quickly. Last in B tier we have the squirrel. Squirrels have the highest arboreal mobility of any build in the game, and this mobility translates quite well to traversing buildings and power lines in the city biome. While they aren't tanks by any means, their thick fur does mean they can survive more damage than your average rodent build. Generally, they don't need to worry about this though, as their agility should be more than enough to allow them to escape most dangerous situations, and enough to allow them to bypass most obstacles and claim the best loot available. While there's certainly no powerhouse, there's no question that when it comes to traversing the urban biome, squirrels are near unparalleled. One of the biggest risks to squirrel mains is that their regenerative tooth ability forces them to use them every so often to damage structures, and gnawing on the wrong thing can mean game over for an inexperienced player. First in A tier we have the raccoon. I see the raccoon build as sort of a direct upgrade to the coyote, at least in terms of its viability in the city biome. It boasts similar DPS and intelligence, but is also omnivorous.
Raccoons are awesome. They're awesome. Look at that. Look at that right there. Taking your grapes right now. When you're watching this, there's a raccoon right now in your fridge stealing your food. Yeah, think about that. And this seems so cool. Yeah, the reason why I looked over here, because my dog is over here named Dave. Just napping on my mini couch. So yeah. Raccoons are awesome. They're one of my favorite creatures alive currently.
Has much better climbing abilities and also has better stealth. Raccoon players have a reputation for making some of the best thieving builds in the game, and this is no mistake. Raccoons can get into just about any container, and their sense of smell is so good that there's basically no way to hide loot from them. One thing to note is that raccoons are a high skill ceiling build with a low skill floor. Despite the fact that the raccoon has all the tools it needs to succeed in the city meta, their average lifespan is only about 2 years despite having a maximum around 20. On a similar vein to the raccoon, next in A tier we have the monkey, another highly adaptable and versatile build, which combines the intelligence of the hog with the mobility of a squirrel to create a build perfectly capable of mastering everything about city gameplay. Monkeys are one of the few builds with an intelligence level high enough to directly interact with humans, whether that be stealing from them, trading with them, or even just generally socializing with them. The monkeys' main weaknesses, which are their low defenses and high food cost, are also somewhat mitigated by cities, since high-value loot is abundant and the predators that could take advantage of the monkey's low defensive stats have a tough time traversing cities uncontested. However, it's important to note that due to a monkey's size, the climbing obstacles in cities aren't always as safe as they seem, so knowledge of how to traverse them is paramount.
Raid is a free-to-play action RPG for both PC and mobile.
In top tier, we have 2 builds which really have total command of cities, as well as nigh untouchability from the hazards common in cities. The first is the Corvid build, including crows, ravens, and magpies. These builds, which are tied with parrots for the highest intelligence level of any bird in the game, are masters of the city meta. Similar to monkeys, their main weaknesses of low base stats other than intelligence and mobility are less of an issue in the city. In fact, corvids play very similar to monkeys in basically every way except that corvids have the flight ability. They too can interface with humans with ease, but unlike monkeys, corvids don't have to worry about obstacles like roads or power lines. In fact, corvids use these to their advantage. Roads in particular can be used to access loot that would be otherwise inaccessible to a build with such a low power stat, whether that be loot from tough tree nuts or from players who didn't have the skills necessary to traverse those deadly roads. This was probably fairly predictable, but there's no question that the best city build in the game is the rat. While they don't have the flight ability, the rat's powerful incisor teeth give them the ability to forge their own paths through cities, being able to gnaw through pipes and even concrete. Their extremely quick spawn rates ensure that once established, a rat player base.
They do have a quick spawn rate, so they can come back. Well, they can give birth a lot. Just the female rat, if it gives birth too much, a lot, the female rat could die of stress. That's something cool I learned. Because I was thinking about getting a fancy rat, the right form of domesticated rat. They're awesome. Learn about them. Yeah. Cool. We just ended up getting a doggo who decides to fart pretty much when she's asleep. His eyes open, staring at me like she does not know what I'm talking about. She does. She does know what I'm talking about.
Will be able to leech off of human loot for as long as there's loot available. They're also excellent swimmers and take very little fall damage, so in a lot of ways, rats are even better suited to cities than humans are themselves. But more importantly, rats are smart enough to learn to avoid traps that humans deliberately set for them. Intelligence really is everything when it comes to the city meta, far more important than stats that are normally must-haves like power and HP. If you're interested in learning more about intelligent animals, I recommend you check out Super Smart Animals, a documentary about the heights of animal intelligence on CuriosityStream. It's an awesome 2-part series that covers both practical.
And I think this is goodbye. I hope this was good for you. Don't know. The one I'm thinking about doing next, by the way, when Earth was in beta. And that is a good one to go on. I'm gonna do this right after this one. So I hope you had fun. Bye. Please like and subscribe. Yeah. See ya.